Starting a new certification can feel like standing at the edge of a big map with no legend, where every road looks important and every detour looks tempting. And that is exactly why this first topic matters so much. AutoOps Plus is not just a collection of cool automation ideas, because an exam is always a measurement system with boundaries, priorities, and hidden traps for people who study the wrong things for too long. The blueprint is the exam's contract with you, and even when it is written in boring language, it is the most honest description of what you are expected to know on test day. When you learn how to read domains, objectives, and task statements the right way, you stop guessing and you start studying with intent. By the end of this lesson, you should feel like you can look at the official AT0-001 blueprint and instantly understand what the exam is really asking you to become capable of doing. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The word blueprint sounds like a building plan, and that comparison is useful because a blueprint tells you what will be inspected, not what you personally find interesting. A certification blueprint usually breaks the exam into domains, and each domain describes a category of skills that the exam designers believe belong together. Those domains are not there to help you organize flashcards, even if that is a side benefit, because they exist to show how the test is assembled and how the scoring emphasis is distributed. When you see domain names and percentage weights, you are seeing priorities, and priorities should change how you spend your time. A common beginner mistake is to treat every topic as equally likely and equally valuable. But exams almost never work that way because some skills are more central to the role than others. If you align your study time with the blueprint, you increase the odds that your effort turns into points instead of into random knowledge you cannot use on the questions you actually get. It also helps to understand what the blueprint is not, because misunderstanding that is where a lot of stress comes from. The blueprint is not a set of lecture notes, and it is not meant to teach you, because it is a measurement outline, not a learning path. That means it will use short phrases that hide complexity, like saying you should understand data types or automation safety, without giving you the long explanation that makes those ideas feel intuitive. The blueprint also does not guarantee you will see every single objective on your exam, because it represents the pool of possibilities, not the exact menu for your specific test form. Another thing it is not is a tool checklist, because the exam is usually written to test concepts and transferable skills rather than your ability to memorize every option in a specific product. When you keep these limitations in mind, you can use the blueprint as a compass without expecting it to be a complete textbook. Blueprints often use a layered structure, and reading that structure correctly is a skill on its own. At the top, the domain names tell you the big themes, and beneath them you will usually see objective statements that get more specific. The phrasing matters because words like describe, explain, interpret, and troubleshoot often indicate a different depth of understanding than words like identify or recognize. For a beginner, the safest assumption is that you need to do more than name a term, because modern certification questions tend to reward applied understanding, even when the blueprint wording looks simple. If an objective mentions reliability, safety, validation, or operational risk, that is a clue that the exam expects you to think like an operator, not like a trivia collector. You are training your brain to pick the best action under constraints, and that is why reading the verbs and nouns carefully is more valuable than highlighting the entire page and calling it progress. Domains also tell a story about what kind of practitioner the exam is trying to shape, and that story should guide how you connect topics in your head. AutoOps Plus is about automation and operations, and operations is where small mistakes turn into big outages because systems are interconnected and time pressure is real. That means the exam is likely to care about predictable behavior, safe defaults, and being able to reason about what automation will do before it does it. When you look at domain groupings, imagine a job role that needs those skills to work together, because the exam is designed around that mental model. If you treat domains like separate islands, you may learn facts, but miss the relationships that help you solve scenario-style questions. A solid approach is to think of domains as chapters in one story about building, running, and verifying automation that supports real systems. That mindset makes it easier to answer questions that mix ideas, like combining data handling with logging, or combining scripting logic with safe operational outcomes. Scoring expectations can feel mysterious, but they become less intimidating when you think about how certification exams are built. Most modern exams include different styles of questions, and those questions may not all contribute in the exact same way, even if you never see that math. You might get straightforward multiple-choice questions and also questions that simulate decision-making, where you have to choose the best action from several plausible options. The key for a beginner is not to obsess over secret scoring algorithms, but to understand that the exam rewards both knowledge and judgment. That judgment shows up when you choose the safest, most reliable approach rather than the most clever approach, because clever is often fragile in operations. Scoring is also influenced by coverage, meaning you cannot ignore an entire domain and hope to pass, because gaps tend to show up in multiple places. If you build broad coverage guided by domain weights, and then deepen the most important areas, you are aligning with how the scoring is designed to measure competence. Another part of scoring expectations is recognizing what a passing performance actually represents. Passing does not mean you are perfect, and it does not mean you can answer every question, because exams are designed so that even strong candidates will miss some items. Passing usually means you demonstrated enough competence across the measured objectives to be trusted with the foundational responsibilities implied by the certification. That means you should plan for uncertainty, and you should practice staying calm when a question is unfamiliar or worded strangely. The blueprint helps here because if you can connect a confusing question back to a domain theme, you can often eliminate wrong answers using first principles instead of panic. A beginner-friendly strategy is to aim for consistent competence rather than flawless mastery, because consistent competence is what the exam is trying to detect. When you understand that, you stop treating each hard question as a sign of failure and start treating it as a normal part of a measurement instrument. It is also useful to understand the idea of domain weighting without turning it into a rigid spreadsheet that drains your motivation. A weighted domain does not mean the exam only asks about that area, but it does mean that the exam designers believe it deserves more attention. If a domain has a larger share of the exam, you should plan to spend more time on it, but you should also be careful not to ignore smaller domains, because smaller does not mean optional. Smaller domains sometimes contain concepts that are easy points if you prepare, and they can be the difference between passing and coming up short. Think of weighting as a way to decide what to master deeply first, not as permission to skip. Your goal is to be well-rounded with a few strong anchors, not lopsided with one impressive skill and several empty gaps. When you study with that balance, you become harder for the exam to trick because you have multiple ways to reason through a question. Blueprints often include statements that sound like simple nouns, such as logs, data structures, or regular expressions, and those can mislead beginners into underestimating the depth. A log is not just text, because it is evidence of behavior, and the exam may test whether you can use that evidence to validate automation outcomes. A data structure is not just a container, because the wrong choice can lead to silent failures where your automation appears to work but actually misinterprets values. Regular expressions are not just fancy search patterns, because sloppy patterns can remove the wrong data or miss important signals. When you read the blueprint, treat each noun as a doorway into a practical skill, not as a vocabulary term to memorize. If you can explain how a concept prevents failure, improves predictability, or supports troubleshooting, you are learning at the right depth for an operations-focused exam. That style of understanding also makes the exam feel more coherent, because each topic becomes part of the same reliability and safety theme. One of the best ways to use the blueprint is to translate each objective into a simple question you can answer in plain language. For example, if an objective is about conditionals that fail safe, your plain language question might be, what should automation do when inputs are missing, wrong, or dangerous? If an objective is about parsing structured data, your question might be, how do I reliably pull the right values without breaking when formatting changes? This translation step matters because it forces you to think like a problem solver rather than like a note collector. It also gives you a way to self-check progress, because you can ask yourself whether you can explain the concept out loud as if you were teaching it to someone else. When you cannot, that is not a crisis, but it is a signal that you should slow down and build intuition with examples. Over time, these plain language questions become your mental index of the exam, and that index is much easier to use under pressure than a pile of disconnected definitions. Another common source of confusion is the difference between what the exam wants you to know and what you might see in real life in a job. Real operations environments involve messy systems, mixed tools, and policies that vary by organization, and the exam cannot capture all of that. Instead, the exam chooses representative concepts that are broadly applicable, like knowing how to reason about input validation, predictable output, and safe automation loops. So when you study, be careful about overfitting to one environment or one tool set, because the blueprint is aiming for portability. That portability is why you may see questions that describe behavior in general terms instead of naming a specific technology. It is also why you need to understand the concept behind a feature, not just what button to click. If you can explain the why behind an approach, you are more likely to recognize the correct answer even when the scenario is dressed up in unfamiliar details. Expectations also include how you should approach ambiguous situations, because operations work is full of trade-offs. The exam may give you answers that are all technically possible, but one is safer, more maintainable, or more predictable. In that kind of question, the blueprint themes become your decision rules, and the decision rules often favor clarity over cleverness and safety over speed. A beginner might pick the answer that sounds fastest, but an operator-minded answer considers what happens when things go wrong, not just when they go right. That means you should practice asking, what could fail here, and how would I know, and what would the automation do next? Questions that involve loops, parsing, and dependencies are especially likely to include these subtle trade-offs, because those are common sources of silent breakage. When you train yourself to think this way, your answers become more consistent, and scoring consistency is exactly what passing requires. Another part of scoring expectations is understanding that you will not always get immediate feedback during the test, so you need a strategy for uncertainty. If you run into a question that seems outside your preparation, the blueprint gives you a way to anchor yourself by identifying which domain it belongs to and what the exam is likely measuring. Often the exam is not testing the obscure edge case itself, but the general principle that would handle it, like validating inputs, handling errors predictably, or choosing a reliable data type. You can also use elimination by looking for answers that violate those principles, such as choices that assume perfect inputs or ignore verification. This is where beginners often gain points without realizing it, because even partial understanding can guide you away from the worst options. The goal is to make your best decision with the information available, not to prove you know everything. When you internalize that, the exam becomes a series of manageable decisions instead of a single do-or-die moment. Finally, you should treat the blueprint as a living document for your study, not a thing you read once and never touch again. Early on, it helps you orient, but later it becomes your checklist for coverage and your tool for diagnosing weak areas. If you do a practice set and notice you are missing questions about data handling or logging, you can go back to the blueprint and find the objectives that map to those misses. That creates a feedback loop where your studying becomes more targeted over time, and targeted studying is what makes busy learners successful. The blueprint also helps you avoid the trap of endlessly improving your favorite topics while neglecting the ones that quietly cost you points. When you consistently return to it, you build confidence that your effort matches what will be measured. That confidence reduces stress, and lower stress makes your thinking clearer on test day.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.